What do you give a man who has everything? Sometimes the best answer is the truth. That, of course, gets a little more complicated when that man is also a king. The story of Nathan and King David is complicated. David himself is complicated. On the one hand, he seems to be a man after God's heart who rose up from a poor shepherd boy to become the king of Judah. With that title, he acquired great wealth and many wives. Back then, that was considered a good thing if you were a king, and he himself may have thought more than once that it is, after all, good to be king. He was all-powerful, and he could have anything his heart desired, with perhaps a few exceptions. For he came to desire Bathsheba, who was already the wife of Uriah. No woman could say no to the king, literally. He was all-powerful. And quite honestly, we don't know her feelings on the matter because she wasn't allowed to have them. When she became pregnant, David had a problem because Uriah was a soldier and he hadn't been home for a while. David therefore arranged for Uriah to die on the battlefield, betrayed by his fellow soldiers and by his king. David might have lived happily ever after that, except God still knew. And so his prophet Nathan was sent to have a talk with David. Speaking truth to power is also complicated and dangerous. And so Nathan came up with a story that was fit to tell the king. There were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. So he began. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except for one little lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler. Instead, he took the lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. The story is not untrue exactly. Instead, it was cloaked as a great injustice that only the king had the power to set right. As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die, David said. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. David was obviously filled with righteous anger. And then Nathan laid the truth on him. You are the man. And before David could respond, Nathan made it clear that he knew everything because God knew everything. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you all Israel and Judah, and if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house because you despised me. Sometimes it is not good to be king, especially if you are a bad one. True, David was powerful enough to just kill the messenger, but he didn't. Bad king though he was at that moment, he still feared God. I have sinned against the Lord, God replied. He could see the truth now. He realized he should be given the death sentence because of his sin. Nevertheless, Nathan let David off the hook, sort of. Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die. But because you have shown utter contempt for the Lord, the son born to you will die. The big problem with this story is that it doesn't really fit into our idea of justice. The child, after all, was innocent. David was guilty of conspiring to murder Uriah, and yet he remained king. Nevertheless, one of the great lessons here is that sin always has consequences. You may not be the one who suffers first. You will, however, always be the one who suffers last, sometimes for the rest of your life. The child was born, and 7 days later the child died, and David was still king. But he knew why this had happened, and he knew the truth about himself. The second lesson here is that sometimes God has plans for us, even if we are sinners. But God help us, because even so we will have to live with the consequences of our actions. David's life went on. True to his word, however, David's life was a troubled one after that. There was one good thing that did come out of it all. He and Bathsheba later had another child, Solomon, who grew up to build the house for God that David was now forbidden to do because of the blood on his hands. So I guess God can still create something good, even though what we do is bad. Come to think of it, that has really been the story since Adam and Eve. The evil we do is never enough to stop God from working on his plan. I don't know if you have thought very much about this idea of justice. There is our idea of justice, and then there is God's justice, rooted in God's own righteousness. Our God is a God of faithfulness, without injustice. Righteous and upright is he, so we read. Therefore, justice means that sin and wrongdoing must always be addressed by God. Like the laws of physics, which he also ordained, there are always consequences when you defy either God's moral law or gravity. On the other hand, there is also God's willingness to forgive and restore. For we are also told that God is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in loving devotion and truth. Somehow in wisdom that is known only to God, Sodom is destroyed, but Nineveh is spared. Both ultimately accomplish the purposes of God. Through Christ, we also see this justice and mercy combined. Sin is judged, but grace is also now extended to all humanity. This is God's way of confronting injustice in this world. In human terms, it is called courageous compassion. It is a form of justice which combines the courage to confront what is wrong with enough mercy to allow for healing and progress. Gandhi understood how it worked. So did Nelson Mandela, and so did Martin Luther King Jr. They understood that justice and mercy are always deeply interconnected. Justice ensures fairness and accountability, while mercy brings compassion and restoration. This is God's answer to our problem. God continually applies both a demand for justice and a measure of mercy to balance off the scales of justice in every situation. It remains true, you cannot break the laws of physics, nor of God, without consequence. But God's justice will always triumph. So how do we support God's justice today? We begin by advocating for justice with mercy, by standing firmly against injustice in our world and speaking truth to power. But we always do so with wisdom and respect. We must also practice mercy ourselves, forgiving others, even when our human justice might demand harsh consequences, offering our help rather than our judgment, and recognizing that everyone is on a journey that is uniquely theirs in this life. And we must always strive to serve the vulnerable by giving our time or resources to those causes that align with the idea of God's justice and ideas that help people rebuild their lives. The latter is called restorative justice, and it's the kind of thing that is practiced by organizations like A Peaceful Habitation. Their idea of justice is working with women who have been released from correctional centers to help redeem and restore them to a better life. God's justice doesn't require a lifetime of punishment for the wrongdoer. Instead, it always provides a pathway for redemption. This is the kind of justice which Jesus himself modeled in his life, by calling out wrongdoing, by speaking truth to power, but still offering mercy and grace and redemption for everyone. Many people expected the worst when, after spending years in prison fighting against apartheid, Nelson Mandela became South Africa's first black president. They expected a race war and a bloodbath. Instead, Mandela pursued justice by dismantling apartheid laws and ensuring equal rights for all citizens. Then he extended mercy by advocating for peace and unity rather than retaliation. He established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which allowed victims and perpetrators of apartheid-era crimes to share their stories, but also helped to foster healing instead of endless cycles of punishment. His leadership showed them that justice does not have to mean revenge. It can mean restoration and healing. It was his ability to balance accountability with forgiveness that helped South Africa transition peacefully into a democracy. We best support justice by living it out in that way. The answer to creating a better world is simple. If you want a more just world, then become a more just person by embracing God's justice for yourself and for others. Be safe, and God bless you.